It's Happy Times and Places. A friend of mine has chosen a Doctor Who story for us to watch. I have to commentate along, emphasising its good qualities, and try to guess what my friend's favourite things about it are.
Hello Toby, and hello everyone. My name is Richard Bignell, the editor of Nothing at the End of the Lane. And this time we've come to the thrilling climax as we watch together part 4 of the Pyramids of Mars.
Well, welcome everybody. It's episode 4 of Pyramids of Mars. I think myself and Richard Bignell, my guest. And Richard, if you don't know him, is the doyen of Doctor Who researchers. He's written a brilliant book on Doctor Who on location, which features what's going on with Pyramids of Mars. And he's chosen some very good things. I think he's already won the competition where I have to see if I can guess the best things about it. Well, I think it's the room. I have to see if I can guess what their favourite thing is. Well, I haven't been doing that for the whole of the podcast. It's only just occurred to me. We're a year in. I just choose my favourite thing and hope they've chosen it as well. I occasionally indulge in a bit of gamesmanship, but I have to be honest as well, because I'd hate it if I chose something that I was doing artfully in order to try and catch them out, and then they chose the thing that I really liked. So yeah, I'd rather be wrong than be right in my heart and then choose the wrong thing and then choose the right thing, because that would be a really bitter failure. At least if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail with the right taste in my mouth. Right, it's part 4 of Pyramids of Mars. This will be interesting, I hope. And we're going to press play, or I'm going to go select, because I'm on episode selection on the DVD, in 3, 2, 1. Now the reason, and it's going to start, the reason I say it's interesting, because often I say interesting when I can't think of anything else to say, and it's a way of buying myself a little bit of time, and it's like a tick, like my ums, and I hate myself for both, and this is why I can never listen to myself, which makes editing these slightly awkward. Isn't it odd? Because they say about people who talk a lot, they like the sound of their own voice. Well, I talk an awful lot, and I hate the sound of my own voice. So, because actually you don't listen to yourself when you're saying things out loud. So actually the talk drowns out everything else. It's a beautiful model. So listen, Pyramids of Mars episode 4, I have seen less often than the rest of it, because you'll recall from episode 1, I think on the repeat, when this repeated when I was at university, I only had the time or inclination or tape, or I might have even forgotten. I remember being annoyed with myself afterwards, to tape the first 3, whereas only moments before, a couple of years before, I would have called off everything, and I would have been pin sharp and precise in my, taping broadcast quality Doctor Who off air. Was stop all the traffic. But I suppose because I'd got the broadcast quality, it's one of the best qualities I had, no bootleg, because it was the VHS. And I think I probably hadn't realised how edited, particularly parts 1 and 4, the omnibus Pyramids of Mars was, because they didn't do that, say, with Robots of Death. They didn't cut anything out of it. But yeah, this had bits lopped out. But I'll tell you what. So when I did properly sit down and watch this in episode form, maybe for the only time, apart from when I then did it for Running Through Corridors, the book that's taken longer to write than any other book in the history of time, that I'm still writing with Rob Shearman, still editing with Rob Shearman, where he and I watched Doctor Who in chronological order. So I probably watched this properly twice, maybe 3 times in this form, and that's not a lot for me for a Doctor Who story. As I'm saying it out loud, I still quite a few times, but I consider this one of the least familiar in its proper form. Whereas I've seen this in its VHS form, dozens of times. But I remember when I got this on this very DVD I'm watching, thinking that Pyramids really went up the Swanee and really lost its luster in this final episode. Everyone's dead apart from Marcus Garman. Well, he's dead. So it's just the Doctor and Sarah. But this stuff's great, isn't it? Tom Baker is so good at this agony. Look at that. There's not a half-hearted atom in his performance, but it's not over the top. It's not, and if he watched this now, he would probably laugh at this and go, "Oh, look, I'm really, isn't that? Oh, I'm giving it." No, and he's a much better actor than he gives himself credit for, and we mustn't let the fact that he now treats it all as a bit of a lark and, "Oh, wasn't I lucky to be Doctor Who?" This is a committed acting performance, and he's really good at the melodrama, and don't mistake the word melodrama for a pejorative term. Shakespeare is melodramatic. It's the stuff of the drama that makes you sit up and pay attention and can talk about things that take you out of the room that you're in, and the semi-detached. Are we semi-detached? No, we're terraced. The terraced house at the end of a row in Manchester on a gloomy winter evening in the 21st century. Melodrama takes you to time and space and to curses and to witches and to magic and to worlds of gods and monsters and Grand Guignol, and where emotions are heightened, where pain is heightened, where stakes are heightened. This is the stuff, and it takes actors of a certain elan and a certain, I think, classical tradition and certainly gravitas to pull it off, or to be exemplars in the way that Tom Baker is. And Tom Baker is an exemplar of this sort of the stuff. And yet he sort of tries to reason as well, and he does seem quite sort of, there's almost a deference there as well when he's saying, "But you, come on, mate, you're evil." But he's not glib. He is addressing this creature as if it's a god. But you are a twisted abhorrence. Oh, it's such glorious. I wish I could feast on this dialogue without talking through it, but I know that is not what the podcast is for. And the pin-sharp precision of the evil, haunting tones of Gabriel Wolfe. It's unfortunately, you could tell that his TARDIS key medallion is on strings. It's quite fun that Sutik has the mental power to sort of drag them over, but only on invisible strings. But that's okay. No, that's okay. That's fine. I think that any sort of I've picked out quite a few things that I don't think quite work in this, but it's only oddly where there are other stories where I wouldn't mention a lot of stuff that clearly doesn't work because this story is so good on so many levels. It's almost like you have to go, well, I do have to point out that there are a couple of bits that niggle me, but the major niggles in this, the niggles in this are the major niggles in this are very minor, but it's because they are surrounded by greatness, and you probably wouldn't even notice them as niggles in certain other stories because everything else is going wrong elsewhere. And that's not to go. There are Doctor Who stories that don't have the wonderful qualities that these have that I still find very entertaining for different reasons. But I think this is genuinely good. This is genuinely strong. Look at Elizabeth Sladen looking scared. And it's just these are, because I've done pretty well with this story. I've met I never met Elizabeth Sladen. I did write to her, and I have a signed photograph of her. I wrote to her to do an interview for my fanzine. I never wrote a fanzine, but I'd intended to. So I wrote to Elizabeth Sladen and Nick Courtney, and I got a signed picture from Elizabeth Sladen, and I got a little note from Nicholas Courtney. That was nice, wasn't it? But I had a letter from Bernard Archard. I met Michael Sheard. I had a letter from Peter Copley, who played Dr. Warlock. I met... I've said Peter Copley, haven't I? I've met Gabriel Wolfe. I met Nick Burnell, the Mummy. Peter Mayock, no, I don't think he even did an event or anything, and wasn't working when I was around. Vic Tablian, whose Ahmed is still around, so there's still got a chance with Vic Tablian. And Michael Collins never had the chance, but I've met Christine Rusco, met Philip Hinchcliffe, I met Paddy Russell. Been to Paddy Russell's house. I have Paddy Russell's cat litter tray in the room upstairs. That's what I store various files and folders of hers that I have, because they were very kindly bestowed upon me. And I've got some of her photos. She's got loads of lovely slides and photos from all sorts of productions, except for any of her Doctor Who's. We found some slides, and they look like actually the same woods as here. It was like, are these lovely summary pictures of Doctor Who on location? No, completely different production. I did find some that I gave to Steve Roberts for something they were doing at the BBC that I know that they'd found useful for something. I can't remember where they were, but they were a Rudolph Cartier production from late 50s, early 60s. So she could, she was taking photos then, or in the vicinity to be taking photos home. She could have had some from the massacre. She could have had some from Quatermass. She didn't. Oh, she did. She had one from Quatermass in the Pit that I've not seen anywhere else. That's now on the Quatermass in the Pit Blu-ray. Do you know what? I seriously considered holding it back because I've got a book coming out, and I thought it would be nice to have an exclusive. But no, I've got it, and this is the definitive DVD. It won't be definitive. It doesn't have a picture that I know that exists. So counterintuitive, and seeing as I know that there are some photos from Doctor Who that could easily be on some DVDs and Blu-rays that we know that people have got who I don't know what they're waiting for, but are not willing to share. And I get very cross with that sort of attitude. I cannot then be an embodiment of that attitude, even though I did feel as soon as I scanned it and passed it on, I went, oh, what did I do that for? But I think hopefully in the when I look back on my life, I'll go, no, that was the correct thing to do. I always think of the line in City of Death, wasn't it? It's something about, when they talk about, having it's an expensive boast or whatever, having one of the Mona Lisas, and yet having a Mona Lisa in a private collection, but nobody know that you can have it because then it wouldn't, because it's been stolen. It's the ultimate avarice, really. But I suppose, but with these photos, actually, I think the person knows that, or the person, it's not just one person. There are various people who've got various photos that we know that they've got, but who like the idea of keeping them to themselves, which that's not my bag, but people can do what they like. I just think it's a shame. And again, what with these Blu-rays coming out are going to be as definitive as it gets, I think. So, what are you waiting for? Anyway, I'm digressing. I sometimes give a lecture. I'm sorry about that. But lectures should be written and thought out and have persuasive arguments on either side, whereas I'm talking on the top of my head whilst half watching a Doctor Who episode. But that's what this podcast is, for better or worse. And if you're still listening, I'm grateful. It's partially because I think I'd geared my mouth to go into overdrive during this episode because I know that it's a lot of actors looking at walls. And, I don't think episode 4 of Death to the Daleks is the best episode of Death to the Daleks, which I do like as a story, and I like more and more as I've seen it later in life. But to do it again, to have one story that ends with people walking through a building made of puzzles, can be seen as unfortunate. Twice seems like a policy, and of course there's no real satisfaction in the solving of the tricks either. Although again, it's worth it for the smile the smiles that Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen give each other. I could watch these two all day. yeah, and you know, and it's a great, it's, you know, it greatly illustrates the Doctor's intelligence and powers of deduction. And in fact, I've recently been doing a Too Much Information podcast on episode 3 of the Daleks, and Sidney Newman sends a memo to Verity Lambert saying what I liked about this episode. This is the guy who, you know, we're told had rejected the Dalek story on principle because it was about bug-eyed monsters. So he sends Verity Lambert this memo saying I like the way they got out of the prison because you know, they used their deductive powers, and you know, it's all about, you know, how they solve a problem. Is that stuff in the BBC video? I don't think it is. I think, yeah, this bit is where he measures the shape with his scarf and all of that. Coming up, we've got Marcus Scarman with the 2 different shape things out. I think my granddad could solve this, and he's been dead since 1988. But to be fair, so Marcus Scarman's been dead for quite a long time. But you know what I mean? It is a childish stratagem. It's one of the shapes is different. I mean, you'd have this in the Weekend Guardian magazine on a Sunday, and when it comes out on a Saturday, but you'd leave it to the Sunday to do the puzzle page, and you know that you'd go, oh, that was fairly straightforward. And I seem to recall Philip Hinchcliffe on the DVD commentary sort of going, yeah, I think we're pushing it a bit here, and I'm not sure Paddy wanted them to do that, Paddy Russell. And I could call her Paddy, can't I? I've got a litter tray. I went to a funeral. But I think it needs it. I think it needs them to do that. Marx Brothers. We're walking in and we're not even looking at each other in sync. We shall turn round and not break our stride and go back out the way we came. I think that's delightful. I think that's cover. I like her peevishness that she does very well, but again, it's not annoying. There's a warmth to it, and I'll tell you what, there's a truth to it. It's real people batting back and forth. That's nonsense. The bit with the scarf and all of that. It's that's not what the puzzle is. I mean, God bless you for trying to make it work. And he measured it across. Yeah, I mean, what he did there bears no resemblance to what the puzzle is, but it sort of doesn't matter because of that beaming smile and and actually, but seeing as that, you know, we're stuck in this, you know, tiny location. I like the sort of lava wall business that's going on. I don't quite know what it is, but it's an attempt to stop it just being, you know, drab flats. There's angles, but particularly that molten bit that is, you know, clearly a bit of, you know, front axial projection or whatever it is, you know, replacing some CSO panels. But that's a clever piece of design, and the beautiful colours in Sutek's cell and that sort of oil slick like kaleidoscope. It's very handsome, seeing as it is, you know. I'm sure that bit wasn't. I'm sure this bit wasn't in the VHS as well. So much that they lopped out, and I'm afraid to say, Pyramids of Mars, much as I like you, not hugely to its detriment. This I don't mind because I love that, and I love when he puts relax and he writes it the right way around, and the way that she goes, the way that she does the kind of yeah whatever, but he's really obviously genuinely terrified. He doesn't know what to do, but she's trying to invest it with a bit of humour as well. It's really well judged and played. Seeing as all it is stuck in a plastic tube. Tom Baker's making it the emotional and dramatic climax of the episode. But what it is it's, and I like the sort of gold Horus mummies, making good use of resources to have a slightly different look at this stage in the episode. But I actually, as a kid, I love the puzzle game, and I was often reading, books about, what's the Greek one about, what has 2 legs, 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at lunchtime, and 3 legs in the afternoon. Oh man, because blah, blah. And you always thought you were clever if you'd worked those out, and they were something you could take to school with you, armed with something that you could, get a conversation going with, and talk to your friends about, and see if you could outwit people. So I think, although it's dreadful padding, within the context of Doctor Who, I think it's perfectly legitimate to do this, and it's an age-old thing, isn't it? It's called the something dilemma, isn't it? Where if I told you, if he says what it is, what we've just seen, it's an actual thing bunged into Doctor Who at a climactic moment when the story's run out, and I think it's okay. I think that works okay. And this is all right. The fighting mummies, and he's going to release Sutek. Oh, and of course, and that mask's okay. There we go. And actually, of course, I say Marcus is dead, but we actually have this moment here where it's just he's dead, but there's still a lingering bit of consciousness. I wonder if in the script it was supposed to be just, Sutek going, I'm free, as Bernard Archer, as Marcus Scarman, and then, the body collapsing. But I like the suggestion there that actually he momentarily, Marcus Scarman returns to us, and goes, oh, I'm free, and then I'm free, and does his Mr. Humphreys, and then dies. And I like the dead body effects. That's the sort of thing I thought was terribly grown up when I was a kid, and would hope that my friends were looking at that moment, because it was a bit like special effects in a Hollywood movie. I mean, yeah, it was for Doctor Who's turns. Oh, this is a brilliant speech, and he does it so well. Actually, I mean, it's not even that brilliant a speech, but it's a great moment. The close up, the fact that Gabriel Wolfe can mesmerize just through the sheer force of his voice. Well, not force of his voice, because it's actually quite a high register, but it's glass. It's like a terrifying wine glass, a terrifying vocal wine glass. Oh, and of course, we get the hand of Sutek, which would I have noticed if I read about it in the radio, I think the Matrix databank in Doctor Who magazine. I should really interview the hand, shouldn't I? For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, when Sutek stands up, there's a hand holding his cushion down. But if you don't know that, you've got some things about Doctor Who to find out, because I think it's one of the first mistakes anybody ever finds out about Doctor Who, isn't there? Is the hand of Sutek, and there's some plausible science to this, I think, isn't there, about the fact that, yes, because I was talking about this to somebody the other day, about the fact that the stars in the sky that are shining down on us, some of them. There's a brilliant Welsh comic called Noel James, who was always one of the circuit's most underrated talents, but I think he did do Britain's Got Talent relatively recently, so I think more people know him now. But he's an absolute surreal genius, and he does a wonderful line at the end of his set where he go, well, I've been a star tonight. By the time I reached most of your consciousnesses, I'd already died. And that's which is a great joke. My name is, in fact, Noel Wynne James, but I don't pronounce the in fact. I love him. Live comedy is great, and there's some people who've never been on telly who are absolutely marvellous. So do go and see your local live comedy gig. But this whole thing about there being a delay, I'm sure it's, I'm sure a proper scientist will go, well, but it doesn't work because of this, and this. If you have a basic science thing going on, you go, oh no, that makes sense to me. The length of time, there is a gap between it reaching Earth. But then, of course, they have to travel in the TARDIS, so when's then and when's now. But it's fine. I've bought the fact that they're not travelling. That's why bringing time travel in an adventure, I always think is a tricky ask for me. which I'm sure we will discuss when we get to some of the more modern timey-wimey episodes. But my you know, he can't go back to 2 minutes before, but he can do this because this is the 2 minutes in real time. So he travelled in space in the TARDIS, but not in but not in time. This is a neat. Oh, because of course in the book it's bookended, isn't it? By Sarah reading the file about what happened. And in fact, I think because it's quite a short bit at the end, it's got a slightly different setup in the Target book, the epilogue, isn't it? I think I read that first, so I by the time I read the book proper, I already knew Lawrence was going to die because my brother's Hector told me, and then I think I pretty much knew what happened to everybody. That's a fantastic shot. Look at that. Well done. That looks to me like the house is on fire. It's a brilliant, and a great final shot to the episode. Well, look, I mean, I distracted myself as much as anything during that, but actually, kudos to the BBC Video people. Actually, I mean, no, I would never say release an archive thing that has been molested. I'm always as, close to broadcast as possible kind of guy. Or exactly as broadcast in terms of the actual, content. But that said, I was expecting something. I was expecting to have to kill a lot more time, but actually the beginning stuff between Sutek and the Doctor is compelling and brilliant, and they're both fantastic. There's a neat ending that works for me in terms of the fact it tries to be science fiction, scientific-y. And the bits in the middle, well, actually the logic problem I think is absolutely fine. It's very Doctor Who-y, and the acting from Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen in that scene is so excellent. So it's only really the switch of doom and the 50p sliding puzzle from a garage of doom bits in the middle that are you're kind of taking the piss here, guys. Especially when Sarah even has the audacity to say this is like that story from a couple of years ago. But it's interesting because I would still isn't it funny? Because Pyramids of Mars is so good for its first 3 episodes, I still think it's an all-time classic, even though I think Part 4 is a bit of a shocker in terms of plot, in terms of script. They've kind of run out of story. And there's all sorts of logistical issues with Pyramids of Mars as well. And yet it's the confidence of the performance, the synthesis of the design and the direction, and just that the muscularity of storytelling in all departments, not just the scripts and the lines, but in all departments that Philip Hinchcliffe strives for at all times, means that I am much more forgiving of it than I am of perhaps stories from other eras. I do think this is such a strong era, and I think it's I've seen people making perfectly fair criticisms of the Holmes Hinchcliffe era in more recent years, but I will not join their number, and I do think they're the high watermark of the classic era. I think it's serious television being made by serious people, who are also all very funny. So what are my favourite things? I can't remember what I chose. Oh, I chose the cliffhanger for Part 1, and I chose the shooting of Professor Scarman in Part 2, didn't I? And I chose the Scarman and Lawrence scene in Part 3, and Richard has chosen Dudley Simpson's music, hasn't he, for Part 1? Did he choose the Mummies for Part 2? And he chose Michael Sheard for part 3. I think I'm going to choose... I think they're so good in this. Tom Baker and the dynamic, just the dynamic all the way through of Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen. Perhaps that's my bonus thing. I'm not always going to choose the Doctor and the Companion. You've got to sort of take it for granted that I like the Doctor and the Companion, because I do, on the whole, always like the Doctor and the Companion. But I think they're especially good in this, and I think they're going through an especially strong phase. And there's an added edge to their relationship that is in no way difficult to watch, that is in no way phony, that is in no way bickering. It's just real, but it gives the whole thing a convincing shadow, and yet they're both, but they're also both so likable, and they clearly both like each other, and I think that really is important. And they're both terribly, terribly good actors. And I can't not say Gabriel Woolf. It's odd because I mean, if I'd done this 10 years ago, I'd have chosen Bernard Archard as Marcus Scarman as well, because I think it's a brilliant. But see, because Richard chose a performance and he chose Michael Sheard. Do I want to choose a performance? Or do I want to choose just the Egyptology thing which pervades it all? Or Christine Rusco's design? So Paddy Russell's direction, which is so unobtrusively good that she almost does her no favours in terms of winning prizes. Do you know what I mean? She's the Martin Scorsese of Doctor Who. She's so good we almost take her for granted. Oh gosh, I mean, even Holmes Hinchcliffe, I'm going to go for Egypt, just because I think the atmosphere that it's provided, the fact that I remember the stories of Lord Carnarvon and all of that. I remember being told those at school, and it being, this is a real thing, and there's this curse of Tutankhamun. And, oh my God! And I remember being absolutely chilled and reading. I found some mythology book in the dusty book at home, and reading about that and getting a real sort of prickle on the back of the neck. So going, let's buy into all of that. And it also gives us the mummies, which are also then reminiscent of the films. But also the way that they turn that Egyptology into spacey science fiction stuff as well. So Pyramids of Mars, isn't that a brilliant juxtaposition? In fact, what a great title of the ancient horror, but also real as well, and earthy, geographical but wondrous, and space. So it's a synthesis of history and sci-fi and horror and sci-fi, which is I think a winning combination. So yes, Egypt and that whole thing. And then for my overarching thing, I will choose Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen's dynamic, because it's not just the performances, it's the writing of that as well. So with honourable mentions to Bernard Archard, Gabriel Woolf, Paddy Russell, Christine Rusco, and Hinchcliffe/Holmes. So a lot of people could have taken a prize away today, and it's not the winning guys, it's the taking part, and thank God you all did. I wonder if Richard has chosen any of them, and do you know what? It might be fair if he does. Part 4. Richard Bignell.
So we're on to part 4, and we finally get to travel to the eponymous Pyramids of Mars, where admittedly everything starts to look a little bit cheaper in the production. Although I think those flowing patterns CSO'd onto the walls of the corridors do look rather nice.
Yeah, I see that.
So the latter part of this episode involves rather a lot of Marcus and his mummy, and the Doctor and Sarah travelling from right to left across the screen and having to solve a number of fiendish siren traps, including Sarah getting caught in the Decatron crucible. In other words, a clear plastic pipe. But this is actually my favourite thing that I'm going to choose for this episode. And it's for 2 reasons. Firstly, there is the neatness in the execution of the effect of the crucible appearing. Now that effect required Elizabeth Sladen to stand still on her mark and remain so whilst the tube was lowered over her. Now, more often than not, these sort of effects don't really work because there's always some slight movement either of the actor or of the camera between the two shots. And it's the reason why a couple of sequences showing lock controls appearing by doors were edited out of this episode. If you go and have a look at the deleted scenes on the DVD, you'll see just how much movement there was between the shots and the reason why they took them out. But not in this case. The effect here is flawless, and Elizabeth Sladen doesn't move a muscle. Now initially I thought this must have been done via an overlay of the crucible being vision mixed over the shot of Sarah, but the script shows that they didn't do that. The shot was locked off, recording stopped, and then they lowered the contraption over Sladen and then started again. Now the riddle of the Osirans with the two guardians is a very old puzzle, and it appears in many different forms. But to a 9-year-old viewer, however, I'd never heard of it, and to be honest, I really didn't understand the explanation as given by the Doctor. It wasn't until a year later, when the Target novelisation was published, that I could take my time to read the puzzle and to understand how the solution worked. And I remember being so pleased with myself when it suddenly clicked into place and I could understand how asking either Guardian just one particular question would lead you to the same answer. So for those reasons, the scenes around the Decatron Crucible are a favourite of mine.
Oh, Richard's a favourite of mine. I mean, he explained the joy of the logic puzzle much better than I did, and I mean, you could tell as well he was living that, wasn't he? And I love that, and that is a very important part of Doctor Who, the bits that connect with you when you're a kid. And I absolutely agree with him that when you read that, when you finally understand it, and you go, oh right, okay, oh yeah, I've got a thing, and it does. It's one of those things that just puts a little spring in your step. It makes you feel like you're understanding the world a little bit more, or actually you understand a part of the world that will be confusing to some. Yeah, that's great. And also his description of you know how it all worked in the studio, because he probably knows what the floor plan looked like, is a lovely insight into just how good that tiny moment that requires a lot of skill in a lot of different departments, that is on screen for half a second, is, and just how much hard work went into these things that are so often sort of now by stupid people dismissed for being shonky, which no, they were a lot of people working very hard with limited resources to do stuff that is actually amazing. So thank you, Richard. So he's chosen, I didn't know it was called the Decatron Crucible, or if I did, I've forgotten because I'm very old and nearly dead. Right. Where did that come from? Right. I was writing an obituary all day yesterday. I think I'm a bit raw. Bonus item for Richard Bignell.
So 4 lovely things about Pyramids of Mars, and what's even nicer is that I get to choose a 5th extra one. And for this, I'd like to choose the way that Pyramids of Mars deals with the subject and concept of time itself. Now, when the TARDIS arrives at the beginning of the story at the Priory in 1911, we're quickly told that this is the location where unit headquarters will be in the future. But it won't be this house, because this Priory will be burned down. Now, what seems to be a throwaway line at the beginning, of course, ends up coming full circle by the end of the story, when we see for ourselves the actual reason why the building was destroyed. And of course, the whole denouement of Sutek's defeat is based around the subject of time. Now, I have to admit that as a 9-year-old, I wasn't terribly clear about what the relationship was between where Sutek was imprisoned in Egypt and the pyramid up on Mars containing the Eye of Horus that powered the force field holding him in place. It was very easy to get all of that muddled up in my head. However, when Sutek succeeds in destroying the Eye of Horus on Mars, the frenetic dash to get back to Earth is all based around the fact that there is a time delay between the two planets. The Doctor and Sarah rush back to the Priory, and they're able to fling Sutek off into the vortex just in time before the signal is finally broken. It is a wonderful, tense finale, even if they do fudge the science a little bit. Radio waves don't really take 2 minutes to travel between Mars and Earth, as the Doctor says. They actually take anywhere between about 4 and 20, depending where the planets are in the solar system. However, it is a great time-based conclusion. Now, I said earlier that part 2 had some really good material to choose from. For that episode, I chose The Lumbering Mummies, but it was a close-run thing with the brief segue as the Doctor takes Sarah and Lawrence into the future to see the world as Sutekh would leave it. And if you chose that as your best bit, Toby, then I really don't blame you for a moment. For once, the programme makes a concerted effort not only to tell us, but also to show us why the Doctor can't leave halfway through a story and go off somewhere else. There are consequences to getting involved with things that have already happened. Now, whether or not you think this explanation works or not is probably by the by. The fact is, they try to give a logic and a reason to it. You can't just walk away, you have to see things through. And finally, on the subject of time, I'd just like to go back to the burning of the Priory that we mentioned earlier and give a mention for the brief 2-page epilogue that Terence Dicks includes at the end of his novelisation for Pyramids of Mars. In the book, after the TARDIS dematerialises the burning Priory, Sarah thinks about what they've been through, and she asks the Doctor, won't all this business get out? I mean, didn't it get out back in 1911? Everything that happened at the old Priory? The Doctor looked up from the console. I very much doubt it, Sarah. Time has a way of taking care of these things. Anyway, when you get back home, you can look it up and see. And then Terence adds an epilogue. Time moves forward to a point where Sarah has left the TARDIS and she's finished her travels with the Doctor. And remembering his words, she visits the offices of a local newspaper that's close to Unit HQ. And she goes and she looks up the events of 1911. She reads about the assumed victims of the blaze and the speculation that one of Lawrence Scarman's scientific devices might have been the cause of the fire. Time takes care of things, just as the Doctor indicated. The epilogue concludes. Sarah skimmed through the rest of the report. So that is what the Doctor had meant. The terrible events surrounding the return of Sutekh had found a natural explanation, a deplorable but soon forgotten tragedy in an English country village. Sarah looked through the window, out into the bustling high street of the little country town. She shivered at the memory of the desolate world that she had seen through the doors of the TARDIS, the world Sutekh would have made had he not been defeated. The sacrifice of all those lives had not been in vain. The pity was that no one would ever know. Sarah closed the heavy old volume and went into the summer sunshine of her own unchanged 20th century. And that's a super end to the book. Terence Dicks takes us forward in time to a companion's future after they've left the Doctor. But in doing so, Sarah is able to reflect on the devastated planet that Sutekh would have left, and she is grateful for her own unchanged world.
Richard Bignell has played an absolute blinder. I agree with everything. I almost feel as though I shouldn't comment on anything he said because I agree with it and it's so well put. So what would be the point? It would be gilding the lily. But it has. I mentioned the epilogue in the commentary for part 4, but it's made me realise actually how much I love that epilogue and actually tying it in with the whole thing of time. And of course, I didn't mention at all the whole thing about the fire of the Priory being mentioned as a thing and it being Unit HQ. So it's still sort of tied in with the sort of, you know, the Doctor Who is, although they've put Unit behind them, you know. I always thought of Terror of the Zygons as the sort of end of the Unit era, but actually no, because they go back with Android Invasion, and you see Harry again, and Benton, and a de facto Brigadier. But yes, this is set on the grounds of Unit HQ, so it's still there as a sort of as infused in the DNA, and sort of almost part of the show present, but the show's present, but they're doing it in different ways. But they haven't, just totally, gone away from it. And yeah, that use of time is very, very clever. I hadn't thought of it like that. And I didn't do the going to 1980 scene, which I'm sure I mentioned in episode 2 was going to be one of Russell T Davis's scenes that he was going to choose to have when it was relaunched, because it's that question that the audience have. So it is, it is an important scene in a way. But look, I'll leave it to Richard, because he was a great advocate for all of that stuff, a very eloquent and perceptive advocate. And so what a brilliant guest he's been. Thank you, Richard. I know he's been plugging his stuff on his intros, but do get Nothing at the End of the Lane. It's ludicrously cheap on PDF online, because printed copies are now a thing of the past, I think. But I'm sure there'll be future ones. He's always doing stuff. His Doctor Who location book is brilliant. All of his stuff is really well researched, and he works like a dog on the Blu-rays, because he does a lot of the quality checking. He scans all the PDFs of the production files, which isn't as easy as you think, because he has to get clearance from the people who've written them, or the various bits of paper or whatever. I know when he did the one for season 18, I had to give him a number for Clifford Rose, because there was a letter from Clifford Rose. So they can't just stick that in; they have to actually get the person's permission. So the amount, and that's just one click on a PDF on what is there something like 1,700 that you'll just sort of zip through, and all of that stuff is done by Richard. Doesn't he does so much that you behind the scenes that you do not see, and it's because of that sort of passion. But that's not some sort of geeky cataloguing he's done there, is it? There's a real eloquent, perceptive insight that it was a joy to, because obviously this is the first time I've heard any of this, to hear, to witness, to see the enthusiasm, to hear the perceptiveness, and to share in the joy of a communal experience of loving a Doctor Who story, even though our communal experience found us expressing that joy in different ways, because I scored no points, or maybe a quarter of a point. But I found that utterly rewarding. And I almost feel bad that I'd suborned myself about the shortcomings of episode 4, when actually I should have just got into it with the enthusiasm of somebody expecting to enjoy it, because actually, or maybe I didn't. Maybe because I had low expectations, I found it. I did do a lecture about a quarter of the way in, though, didn't I? Doesn't matter. I cannot change. I've committed to this timeline. I cannot change what has happened to it. Ha ha ha, as Richard so eloquently pointed out. Well, look, I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I think Pyramids of Mars is one of the greats of Doctor Who. My brothers were right. Is that this is when Doctor Who is really good. I mean, I think Doctor Who is generally really good, but yeah, I totally buy the greatness of Pyramids of Mars. So thank you for being here. Please join me for another one of these. Great thanks to Richard Bignell. He's on Twitter, and it's at Nothing Lane, I think, something like that. So follow him, because he's always coming up with interesting stuff. But I would like to thank Doctor Who for bringing Sutek's gift of the Pyramids of Mars to all humanity. Goodbye. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Richard Bignell, who can be found on Twitter at Nothing Lane. I really am very grateful, to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Mark Aldridge, Kit Allen, Sebastian April, Tilt Oriza, Simon Ash, Richard Alt, Lung Baramus Banks, James Blackett, Robin Bland, Kyle Bors, David Brody, Nigel Bromley, Hugh Buchtman, Anthony Carroll, that's not an echo, there's two of them, Phil Chapman, Ralph Chilton, Susan Christian, Steve Churchill, Charles Coffin, Simon Coling, Paul Colnaghy, Paul Cornell, Leslie Coots, Peter Crocker, Lee Kremin, Dave Curran, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Matt Dale, Rob Dawson, Chris Davis, Hugh Davis, Robert Davis, a trio of Davises, Ian Dean and Tim Dickinson. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Ooh, barely got through that by the skin of my teeth. Well, that's for the patrons. You could be among their number if you go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where for as little as £3 a month, you can get all sorts of bonus goodies and advance releases and exclusive material. Exclusive material and bonus goodies are sort of the same thing, but I'm trying to do a sales pitch here, people. There's early releases too. If you're listening to this as it goes out to the great unwashed, because washing is mandatory in patron land. Well, no, I do it for you. That's part of... You get washed. You don't. That's not a legally binding statement. If you're listening to this as it goes out, it's probably 4 or 5 months after you could have heard it if you were a patron. So go there, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. If you don't want to do a monthly commitment, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke and just chuck a few pennies at me if ever you think I'm sounding like I'm dying. Or if you can do neither of those things, that's perfectly understandable. I'm just grateful to you for listening. It really is nice to know that people are out there enjoying this stuff, and you send me nice feedback, and I'm grateful. But you could also send nice feedback to iTunes or wherever you digest your podcasts. You know the system. There's a star system. 5 of those really helps, and a couple of lines of really good review really, as I say, help these to stand out amongst the crowd. So if you could do that, I'd be very, very grateful. And then, of course, there's Twitter at Toby Hadoke or at Hadoke Podcasts. There's 2 of them. I have 2 Twitters. Yes, I'm very ostentatious. And you can also come to my comedy night, Excess Malarkey, every Tuesday in Manchester at 8 p.m. I'm the resident MC there and have been for 24 years. It's an excellent value night where we get all the best comedians from the country to perform at as small a door charge for you as we can manage, and it's very reasonably priced, runs on a non-profit making basis. There are examples of it online on our twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey show that has an archive of stuff up there right now, but also we do a monthly Sunday night show there as well. And I never got time to say, one of my memories is when they were repeating some stories back in the late 80s, the 90s, in the 90s. They'd occasionally go, and Doctor Who is available on BBC Video. There are these. And one time there were including the adventures Death to the Daleks, The Seeds of Death, and Pyramids of War. And I still have that on VHS somewhere. I think it might be at the end of one of the McCoy stories then. But it's at the end of some broadcast of a Doctor Who, and I thought, has he got it upside down, or has he just not bothered to? Or does he think Pyramids of War is a better title than Pyramids of Mars? But you can see it's slightly inverted. War and Mars. He's inverted the M to the W, hasn't he? But that's just a thing I remember. You maybe remember that too, and we've got a bonded moment of kinship that nobody can take away from us. All right, that was that.